So thanks for joining. Today we're going to cover PhoneView and how it works with Webex UC Calling. So we'll just cover some of the highlights and a little demonstration of it in action. The agenda for today, usual kind of stuff in terms of house rules and quick overview of who we are. A quick refresher on PhoneView and AutomationFX features. And then we'll talk about the actual new capability that's been added to the Webex Client, which is the UC Calling functionality. And then we'll talk about how we can work with it because of our unique soft phone support. That's complemented with our virtual endpoint capability, and then just a little kind of information on compatibility matrix of what you can use and when you can use it. In terms of the house rules, the session is being recorded, so you can email sales@unifiedfx.com to get a copy. If you do have any questions, which are great, it's about the many time you want. If you don't mind using the Q&A panel and make sure you submit it to all panelists. I've got a few of us here that can answer some questions if any come up. There is a chat panel and stuff, but I prefer if you use the Q&A. It's a wee bit easier to kind of track, if that's okay. In terms of UnifiedFX, we've got three main products. I mean, there's kind of sub-elements in there, but at a high level, we've got PhoneView, which really is obviously what we're going to talk about some of its capability today. It's used quite literally by thousands of customers to manage millions of phones, and it's the most powerful endpoint management out there. And in particular, it's the only Cisco compatible product that does what it does. We also have a wallboard solution, which currently is designed for UCCX. It is completely web-based, so it's nice, simple to deploy and install, very easy to use, just browser-based, no plugins. And by design, it's incredibly fast real-time updates. And then finally, we have MigrationFX, something that we created on request by Cisco, to the level that we come up with a very innovative, hence patented concept of how to replace an old phone for a new. Again, that's something that we've got a lot of experience with because we know endpoints pretty well. In terms of a quick recap of PhoneView and its features, not going to call on everything on this slide. You can obviously read it, but a couple of things that are more relevant for today are soft phone support. Again, that's an important feature in terms of Webex UC Calling. As far as I'm aware, we're the only software that can do what we do. Pretty hard to do it, to be fair. It's hard to copy. So that's probably why we're the only one that's done it as yet that we're aware of. And I'll obviously go into detail of what it is and how you can drive soft phones. A complementary component that we added to PhoneView, which works really well with soft phones, is the concept of virtual endpoints. That's something where we can effectively, PhoneView becomes a soft phone. It actually registers that endpoint directly inside PhoneView, terminates the media and signaling, etc. And the reason why we call it virtual is because you can register multiple simultaneously. So it saves you having 4 or 5 computers with different clients on each one and jumping between them. You can do it all in one single application. A little bit of information on the kind of complementary component that goes with PhoneView, which is AutomationFX. So PhoneView is a desktop product, so that has some benefits and restrictions. The key benefits is a very interactive real-time user interface. Obviously, some restrictions are maybe accessibility and the nature of certain types of interactions kind of need to be web orientated. So we built the AutomationFX platform to complement PhoneView, and we have a few features that run on that platform that are more suitable, such as PhoneFX, which is single phone remote control capability, NotificationFX, which is a way to en masse send messages to lots and lots of Cisco endpoints, and you can initiate that in lots of different ways. We even have an API component where you can do it programmatically. We can also automate endpoints as well. We have an API/SDK component to AutomationFX. All the things that you can do interactively with PhoneView, or at least most of them certainly, you can actually do with an API. So it kind of makes life pretty simple when you want to just script things and get things going by themselves. So a quick summary on the Webex UC Calling functionality, and before I maybe go into these points in any more detail, just to be clear, this is the new capability that Cisco incorporated in the Webex Teams client, which effectively has been rebranded to just basically the Webex client. What Cisco have effectively done is enable that client to do dual registration. So previously, that client basically connect to the Microsoft, Microsoft, getting my vendors mixed up there, to the Cisco cloud, particularly the kind of SIP endpoints and all those kind of things that register and allow the messaging and SIP calling in between the Teams clients, as they were called. Which is a Slack type pattern and all those kind of things for that kind of client user interaction. And what Cisco have now done is incorporate effectively the Java client's core functionality inside Webex, and they've done that effectively through dual registration. So when you run the latest version of the Webex client, you have to enable this in the Webex Control Hub, but effectively you can enable the UC registration components, and with the right configuration, the client will register directly to CUCM at the same time. So it means you can have your cloud calling entity, and that can just be business to business interaction, etc., and the collaboration features that go with it, the meeting functionality, etc., can work hand in hand with your desk phone configuration, PSTN services, etc. So a pretty good solution. And gives you a bit more flexibility. I'd actually say it's quite a simple solution overall, and I'd say it's actually quite feature rich for a relatively new capability that's been included. And the reason why it does have so many features, as listed on the slide here, is it uses the same code base as the Java client. So back in the day when the Java software was being developed to replace the IP communicator, the way that they approached it was, I think it was primarily the Cisco team in Ireland, basically put together a kind of independent code base called the Client Service Framework. And that effectively was the core, media and signaling element with the Cisco proprietary extensions, all inside there, and it allows it to kind of be cross-platform and be headless, effectively, that code base. And then it was incorporated into various aspects. The Java client is probably the most well-known delivery mechanism for an endpoint that uses that client service framework, but it's actually used in a few other Cisco components as well. Now, because it is the same core feature set, that means there is a lot, maybe not all, but certainly a lot of capability that Java has that's been directly enabled inside Webex Client with the UC calling functionality enabled. So one of those features is the ability to perform CTI control. And now this is where it can get a little bit confusing, because there's the client, as in the Webex UC calling client, can control a desk phone. That's something that is incorporated there. I'm talking about the opposite direction, which is more like a contact center agent, where using CTI, you can actually perform instructions to monitor, manage, and control the actual Java client itself. And that's what you're going to see in action today in the demo. So it means we can control the Java client, and that's good for testing, etc., and remote management aspects. Now, one thing that they've also incorporated, which I personally think is a really good thing that they've done this, is remote registration via Expressway, similar form effectively to MRA. So previously, if you had a home worker and you wanted to give them, a logical extension of your on-premise telephony platform, you'd pretty much either do a VPN using probably AnyConnect, or a more advanced way and more flexible way would have been using Expressway and having a phone registered via MRA. Now, that's MRA capability is now part of what's capable of being deployed with Webex UC Calling. And that means you can have a client without a VPN running at home and be effectively registered to your communication manager. So it gives you a lot of flexibility. And the good news is MRA works via CTI as well. So you can control. So we already have Cisco phones that register via MRA. So the same mechanism, and PhoneView already is used to control them. So the same thing applies to the Webex UC Calling client. As kind of mentioned, that second last bullet point, Webex Client can control a desk phone. In this case, what I'm going to demonstrate is the other way around, where we're going to control the Webex Client. And effectively, this supersedes the Webex hybrid UC calling, which, you know, certainly from my point of view, I think that's a very good thing. I found that particularly complicated from a deployment perspective and an architecture point of view. This does have maybe some different challenges because it's more client orientated solution, but ultimately I'd say it's a net reduction in complexity of the overall solution. So in terms of soft phone support within PhoneView, this will be the core of the demo we'll get to, is effectively PhoneView can now work, it has been for a while, but able to work with soft phones. It's an optional thing in PhoneView. There's a little checkbox against your cluster configuration, and you can choose to pull in soft phone devices along with physical phones. Once you have them in there, then there's really two aspects to it. There's the CTI control, and within that, there's the ability to emulate the state of the device visually. So that's that screenshot at the top there. So we can use CTI event information and transform that into, you know, effectively what the phone is up to. So you can see what call it's in, how long it's connected, call state, etc., calling party number information. And then the second aspect of that support is the ability to perform actions. That's the CTI controlling side of it. So that means that, I know you'll see this in a demo, but we can do logical CTI operations such as call, transfer, conference, etc., answer, encall, hold, and unhold. We can dial numbers directly from the keypad, and even do in-call DTMF as well using the same keypad. So it's quite simple and intuitive the way we put it together. Now, in terms of working with a soft phone, there's really kind of two ways. And when I say soft phone, I'm talking about previously it's really just Java or maybe IP communicator in some situations that you could do this. But effectively, because Webex uses the same code base as Java, it effectively does all the same thing. So when I say Java, I might effectively apply the exact same thing for Webex. So when the Webex client is online, as in it's registered, it's running, it's on the user's computer, we can control that and we can see what it's doing, and you can validate stuff, etc. But that's obviously quite disruptive if, you know, the user's computer suddenly starts making phone calls and answering calls, etc., as you're performing tests. So something that's quite important, and one of the reasons why we didn't do soft phone support until we could do this, is the ability to work with Java/Webex Endpoint when the user's offline. And that basically means that the user's at bed, they've shut down the computer, they've logged out of their Webex client, whichever reason, they're effectively offline. And even if they're offline, obviously we can't control it whilst it's offline. But what we can do is we can use the virtual endpoint mechanism within PhoneView and register that Java client inside PhoneView to bring it online again. You're bringing it online within PhoneView. You're not disrupting the end user, but it's the exact same user device and its configuration. So all the same tests, etc., apply. So in terms of some of the scenarios that you can use that capability for, at a high level, it means simple things like you can work with hard and soft phones in a single interface. So that now means you can see your Webex UC Calling clients in there and work with them all together, along with your hard phones if you wish. You can do remote assistance or remote testing. You don't need to do a desktop sharing with the user. Sometimes you might want to do that, obviously. There's sometimes where it's a user interface aspect on the client that you might need to help them with. But by being able to test, you know, the functionality of their endpoint without doing a desktop sharing session, it gives you a lot more scope in terms of when you can do it. You don't need to wait for the user being available or online, etc. And in some organizations, it might be a separate team that does that level of support as well. So it kind of gives you a bit more flexibility. In terms of registering the Jabber device or the Webex device, you can register that locally. So you'll see that in the demonstration, but that's effectively the Webex client, its configuration that goes with it, the client service framework device, comes along becomes live and registered within PhoneView. So PhoneView sees the endpoint, registers it within PhoneView. PhoneView is the soft phone at that point in time. And by doing that, that means you can do testing that's non-disruptive to the user because its endpoints are live inside PhoneView. And obviously that extends the test scenarios you can perform, the validation of third-party applications, etc., that work with that endpoint. And one thing I find particularly frustrating, if you were testing a Jabber device, you might take your own Jabber client, your own Webex client, you might reconfigure it. It's harder to do with Webex UC Calling. Once it's kind of configured, it's very sticky. So it actually really kind of tie quite tightly to the person's configuration, which is a good thing because it makes it simple to set up, but it's maybe a little bit more effort from an administration point of view if you want to chop and change the client service framework device that's configured against the Webex session. So you don't have to keep reconfiguring your own personal or test Webex instance. You can take the existing client service framework device and just bring it alive inside PhoneView. There's other things you can do as well. The full media is supported through PhoneView, which just basically plays to whichever sound device you want. You can choose which sound card, etc. And that means you use standard Windows applications to inject or record audio into that device and call in or out, etc. I just spotted a question there. Does this only work with Jabber or does it support IP communicator as well? The good news is it does support IP communicator. I should have that on a slide somewhere. Just going to jump to find it. I think it's probably back the way. Yeah, on this slide here, software support CTI remote control for Jabber, Webex UC Calling and IP communicator. There's a slight restriction that we cannot register an IP communicator device. So we can't do the offline kind of mode. The soft phone has to be online somewhere on the user's PC or if you set it up on another computer. But yes, we can work with an IP communicator. We do more with Jabber and Webex UC Calling, but we still can do most useful things with IP communicator. So let me skip back again. So moving on from software support to talk more about the actual virtual endpoints themselves, is we can register multiple real devices. And what we mean by that is there's lots of ways that you can perform SIP registration. So you could write your own SIP stack and you could bring and register that device and endpoint alive. But what we actually did when we put this virtual endpoint capability together is we took the Jabber Web SDK, which uses that same client service framework code base, and we made it headless and we embedded it inside PhoneView. So it's PhoneView is the user interface effectively, and it's the exact same code base that Jabber / Webex uses underneath the hood. So that's what we mean by it's real Jabber instances that we can register. And the key thing is we can register multiple on a single PC. So the simplest way to think about this is you could have 10 soft phones running at once on one computer. So that saves having 10 computers, each with a separate instance of a soft phone. You can have one computer with 10 soft phones on it. And they can all be registered online at the same time, any device that you want, a simple right-click action to initiate it. And that means that testing scenarios are just a lot quicker, easier, and simpler. It supports, so that built-in soft phone capability supports multi-cluster scenarios. So it will register with all the different CUCMs all in one session. As I pointed out a second ago, it's very easy to do. It's just one click to register. You can actually get into auto-register as well, open PhoneView, and they will register straight away if you want them to. You can also enable auto answer. So if you want to have a virtual endpoint answering calls automatically, maybe you've got some media you want to play through to that endpoint. So you can almost do, you know, I'm not saying it's IVR as such, but you can do some kind of automated thing. So it's quite flexible. The actual virtual endpoint itself is actually controllable by CTI. So that means that when we bring that virtual endpoint alive within PhoneView, PhoneView is controlling it technically, that's how we drive it, but other third-party applications can do that as well. So it's quite good if you've got maybe third-party applications that would work with a Jabber endpoint. They will work with this virtual endpoint as well if you want to test them. And it supports, each instance of those virtual endpoints supports two-way audio. Technically it supports video, but we haven't really given that out officially yet. That's in there as a beta feature, which we can enable if you want to try it out. The reason why we haven't done the video or given out the video to everybody yet is it's very CPU intensive, so you can't really virtualize 10 video calls. We can generally do about 1 or 2 active video sessions before it starts to put a bit of a heavy load on. You can do something like 50 audio sessions technically, but you can only do about 2 video. So video is more of a ad hoc individual testing, but the audio-based call, we can do lots and lots of them on a virtual endpoint. In fact, there you go, it's just what I was talking about. So in terms of virtual endpoints and the two-way audio and video support, it's just indicating that if you do want to try the video capability out of these virtual endpoints, you can contact sales at UnifiedFX.com and we can look at enabling that for you. For each virtual endpoint, you can set up different media per instance. So you could have, for example, a headset going to one virtual endpoint and the speaker and microphone of the main device, main PC going to a second one, or have virtual sound cards and all those kind of things. That gives you a lot of audio flexibility. You can also use it with PhoneView's remote audio feature, and that means you can have two-way audio to and from PhoneView, basically, if you want to inject audio into a call somewhere. You can do quite a lot of complex stuff as well if you really want to go with it, but you can combine virtual audio video drivers, so you can have even more separate audio instances rather than just having one audio file playing out to multiple virtual endpoints. You could have virtual audio devices and have different audio and video accordingly. And you can just use standard Windows applications if you want to inject or record any of the audio through those virtual endpoints. That's the kind of comments I was talking about scale. Generally, we recommend a max of about 10 virtual endpoints per PC. By default, with a license, you'll get 2 instances. With a paid license, you'll get 2 instances typically, and that can be increased if you come and talk to us. We'll have a chat with you about it. But we have actually tested it with 50 on a single PC with just audio, and that worked perfectly well. But you know, the functionality of a virtual endpoint is more about deep features because it's a real Jabber endpoint, as opposed to, you know, load testing and things like that. There's other tools that are more appropriate for bulk calling, such as, you know, SIP stacks and stuff like that that can send out 1,000 calls, etc. So that's the main premise for the virtual endpoints. And ultimately that means you've got a single solution for interactive testing. So you can control phones remotely, or you can register them locally and do a combination of both. And you can have calls going from one virtual endpoint to another to prove out your dial plan. That could even be across clusters if you want to have inter-cluster calling validated and things like that. Definitely no need for multiple PCs or physical devices. You can do it as a pure soft solution to test your dial plan, etc., and other features. And as you can see, there's a whole bunch of stuff in terms of how you can interact with multiple Jabber or Webex devices together. Some advanced functionality you can test and work with, such as monitoring and recording. It's really good for testing complex dial plans because obviously you can have multiple devices at once in different locations, etc., and test out our call patterns you wish. And basically, you know, it just makes it really simple to work with endpoints without having real devices anywhere or even users on clients. Okay, that's the kind of bulk of the slide deck. The last thing before going to the demo is just talking about the scenarios of how we can work with desk phones and soft phones here. So as a quick kind of summary really is there's two main aspects to working with an endpoint. There's the ability to view the endpoint and see what's happening. And there's two ways we can do that. We can take a screenshot effectively, which is an image of the endpoint itself, or we can render, which uses CTI to visualize it. So as you can see under the view section of the table, we can always render, because as long as the endpoint supports CTI, we can turn that CTI information into a rendered image. Whereas when it comes to seeing the actual screen of the phone, there's more constraints there. You know, you can't do that over MRA. You can technically do it over a VPN such as AnyConnect, but with that little bullet point there, the VPN profile has to be set up accordingly for that to work. So it's not necessarily going to work out the box. Soft phones don't even have the concept of that. That's really in the domain of doing, you know, PC application sharing, etc. So that's the visibility of the endpoint. If you look underneath the control section, there's really two main aspects to that. One is the ability to make and receive phone calls, you know, remotely control the calling aspect of the device, which to be fair is a telephone. That's generally its primary function. And then on top of that, a second aspect of control is the ability to work with the settings on that endpoint. And as you can see here, we can always work with calling. Same reason why we can always render, because it's CTI based. When it comes to the actual settings themselves, that's something that really only applies to desk phones. The setting and configurations of soft phones are more kind of at the operating system level, you know, such as registry entries and things like that. That's not really in the domain of reach of our software. So, but when it comes to desk phones in particular, we can delve into that in great detail. One point I just wanted to mention is from a soft phone point of view, especially because of Webex UC Calling has support for MRA, that means that even without a VPN, but just running, you know, via MRA from a soft phone client, we can still make calls, render, see what's happening, etc. from that endpoint's perspective. Okay, so time to jump to the demo. I'm going to answer questions and stuff at the end, etc. But before I jump into that, and I'm just getting my computer ready for sharing, I've got a little 2-question poll here. If you don't mind filling in your responses to that, it'd be greatly appreciated. I'm just going to kick that off. I think we'll run for about 5 minutes, so you've got a little bit of time to submit it. So if I open that up now, you should see that poll appearing in your panel. If it's not visible, there's a polling panel in the Webex client that you should be able to open up, and you can put your responses in there. That'd be appreciated. Okay, bear with me a second to share my jump desktop session, if I can even find it, if it's still alive. Nope, looks like it is. Excellent. Okay, so let me just describe what I've got on display here. On the bottom right-hand corner, I've got an instance of the Webex client. So this is configured for UC calling. You can tell because of the little icon down the bottom tray there with call settings. If I click on that, you can see that's got things for managing your call forwards. This is this client at the bottom right is registered directly with our communication manager in the lab here. If I do open call preferences, you can see in here there's various other settings relating to that CUCM integration, etc. Okay, so this is the new extended mode of operation of the Webex client. This is effectively configured for dual registration, so it's got my own Webex account and registered to the Webex Cloud service, which was previously Spark, and then it became Webex Teams. It's now just straight Webex. But it also has the registration to our lab communication manager. Now, on the right-hand side here, I can just, it's a simple cell phone. From the point of view, I can dial a number, I can do audio, I can do video, and I've got obviously my call list here I can use. On the top left-hand side, I have PhoneView. In fact, I've got a little panel jumping up at me here. I'm trying to get rid of. Let's put that there. On the top left-hand side, I've got PhoneView. Now, I've kind of shrank it down a little bit just to kind of prove a point here. If I slide this here, you can see there's a lot more devices that we can work with, but I've zoomed right in, so we really just work with these two for now. Underneath that, we have the activity log, so you can see the kind of operations that's being performed. On the left-hand side, we have a summary panel here underneath the Data Explorer. That takes a lot of the key information of the devices that are held by PhoneView, and you can see how many are registered, etc. A whole bunch of criteria under here. We're not going to use that today. Underneath the Data Explorer, you have this keypad panel. There's actually three components to this keypad. There's the kind of old style. This is more meant for physical button presses that mostly will work with physical phones. Old kind of 7900 series style. The newer 6900, 8900, 8800, etc. There's a few extra different buttons in there, but where applicable, it is model independent. You can still use this keypad with 7900s and vice versa. This is one that's got the rocker on it, etc. But the keypad I really want to talk about and show you is the one that we call universal. Now, another name that we could have given this keypad is CTI. It is effectively a CTI keypad. So rather than having to develop a CTI application and come up with proprietary interactions, etc., what we actually managed to do was simplify and normalize the interactions that you could perform with an endpoint. Its primary, calling services, etc., are all being condensed into this one keypad. But the important point is the logical CTI operation. So it's not a button press, like a remote button press as such. It converts into a logical CTI operation. But the key thing about this CTI keypad is it's stateful. So that means that if it was in a call and you've got an endpoint that you're sending instructions to from the keypad, when you do the number pad here, it would be DTMF digits if it was in a call. If it's not in a call, idle state, etc., it would then be off-hook dialing, etc. So it's very intuitive and just behaves just like a real phone, effectively, from a user experience point of view. The top-hand panel here, this little kind of white box is where you can enter a number. You can actually put a SIP address, etc., in there as well. So it's nice and flexible. And anything you put into that white box, if you put anything in there, you don't have to, it will then work with one of these three buttons here. So either you can add in to a conference call with a particular destination, you can transfer an active call to another extension, or you just initiate a call to that number. So we're going to do the last option here. Now, what I have in display in PhoneView here is two devices. The left-hand device, CSF Stephen, this is the client service framework device that this client is connected with, okay? So the call settings entity, the dual registration component, this is me looking at it from a CTI perspective. This is a rendering display, so it's taking the CTI information and visualizing it. On the right-hand side, we have a real phone with real screenshot, so you can see the actual phone display in this case. So you can work in either mode, you can select them individually. If I right click on that phone, I can choose automatic screen render. If I right click on this one, I've chosen automatic screenshot. I can change that to render as well. When it's a soft phone, even if I choose automatic screen render, technically even if I choose automatic screenshot, it will actually perform a render anyway. So even though it's in the user interface, effectively it's redundant. It will effectively make it a render instead because there is no way to take a screenshot from that type of device. So let me start a demonstration. So I've got the client down in the bottom right here. And for example, if that client was making a phone call, so if I choose that number from a missed call earlier and I click audio call, we can see the call dialog panel opens up here. And I'm just going to move that out of the way for a second, if my drag operation would work. Make that a little bit smaller. So that's my call dialog panel up here. But with PhoneView, I got control, so I can see that's the inbound call on that right-hand phone. So if I use the keypad, I can choose answer, and that will connect it for me. Now, in my particular setup, I don't have a microphone. I've got a remote desktop session back to my computer in the office. We've got a little video display there where effectively you can see a little panel that I put. So that's in front of the phone in the office there. So we're not really bothered about the video aspect because it's getting late. It's not really that dark, but the blinds are shut, so the office is a bit dark. So there's not a lot to show you from a video point of view, unfortunately. But the point is, we can see that the Webex client, as it's running here, this could be on a user's computer anywhere in your organization, is actively in a call. They're doing this session to that extension. From PhoneView's perspective, well, in this case, it's on the same computer, but obviously it doesn't have to be, it's just because I'm doing the demo. From PhoneView's perspective, it can see that particular device and the fact that it's talking to Mohammed and its extension number 2012 that it's talking to, how long it's connected, and its calling state. So for example, if the user who's using the Webex UC Client software puts the call on hold, so you can see on the right-hand side, the user interface is on hold. We can see on the far end call party that, it's changed display because it's gone on hold. There's no video anymore. And if we look in PhoneView, its remote view of what the Webex client is doing, we can see it also knows that it's on hold because the little kind of pause icon there. And if we resume, the call goes back again. We can see the video starting to kick in again, and we can see the states back to active. And then if the user hangs up, so the little cross there, we can see that state being reflected in PhoneView. Now, in this case, I'm really working with two devices. I'm working with a physical phone, which is the other party that we're calling, and we're working with the soft phone client to see what it's doing. Now, that's the seeing what the client's doing part. Now I'm going to take control remotely of that Webex client. So if I go back to PhoneView here, and this time I'm going to do the same operation. I'm going to call the same extension. So I've already got the number in this white bar. I don't have to do it in there. I could just dial the keypad and then click call. That needs to be blank if you do it that way. But if you just have a preset destination, you can type it in there. And the way PhoneView works, if you're not familiar with it, anything you select, you are controlling. I can technically select multiple things if I want to, but just for now, we're keeping it simple. We're just going to select that phone on the left. So that represents this client down the bottom right here. And if I click call, we can see the rendering shows what's happening. We can see the far end party here. We can also see the calling dialog on the user's computer has appeared. Oh, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to get into the corner. And then if I try to make that a bit smaller, like so, so you can see that's ringing away, but I don't need to get the user to answer it. I can control that from here. So I can go to the far endpoint that it's calling. I can choose answer. Let me get rid of that little dialogue because I've got a microphone set up. Oh, this time we can actually see my desk in the office. So that's a bit dark. You can see the sun in the window there. It's not too bad in Scotland at the moment. If I go to the left-hand side, we can see the state. And effectively what I'm trying to show you is this little panel here. That's our representation of the calling activity that the user sees on the right-hand side, okay? If I go to here and I do hold, you can see it's shown as held within PhoneView, and the user sees it here. Now, the user could resume it, for example. Doesn't have to be PhoneView driving it. all the time. And that will be reflected back in the rendering. But let's just do it in the rendering. So we'll do hold within PhoneView, and then we'll do unhold. So we're back. Oh, did I do that? Connection not found. Oh no, I think I marked something up there. That's back. Yep. And then if we basically hang up, so that was the end call button, we can see the dialogue's gone and it's disconnected. So that was me. So that's two aspects there. That was one aspect was seeing what the user's doing. The second aspect was PhoneView controlling the user's endpoint. And then the third thing I want to show you is what if that endpoint is offline, right? Or even if technically their Webex client's running, we can take control of their client effectively and register it within PhoneView. So to do that, if you keep an eye in this activity log, there'll be some entries in here. If I right click on the endpoint, now currently this is registered on this user's client on the right hand side here. But if I choose this register option here, when I do that, what it's actually going to do is going to take over that registration. PhoneView is going to become the soft phone for that particular device. And if you look down here, you can see connecting, connected, registering, registered. So it's now alive. And if you look over in the Webex client, it's quite subtle, but down the very bottom there, it says phone service disconnected. So because it's dual registration, the Webex kind of cloud aspect is still registered and online, and they can, still do that form of communication. But the communication manager's registration is currently offline because we've taken control of it in PhoneView, and PhoneView is now the soft phone client driving that particular extension. And that means we could do the same test without disrupting the user. So if I do the same phone call, I do a call like so, I go over to the other party, I answer the call, we can see that it's connected. I don't think I've got any video set up on this particular computer at the moment. And that's the same operation, but notice nothing's happening on the Webex client, so it's non-disruptive testing. So we're still working with that same device effectively, but without interrupting the user. After so we can then do various operations, so I can put it on hold, unhold, etc., end call, and it's gone. Now, what if the user wants to take it back again? All they have to do is click on, let me say no to that for a second, on that little panel that appears down the bottom, they click on phone service disconnected. Your phone is in use, your phone service account is used by another device. That's what PhoneView is doing at the moment. Click to sign into the phone service in Webex. So this enables that second registration basically, or re-enables it. So I click yes. If you look down here, you can see that little warning's gone, call settings there, and this is now online. If we look inside PhoneView, we can actually see that it detected that happened, and it's unregistered itself, and it's telling you that it was registered remotely. So it's now been handed back effectively to the end user. That's it really. So that's the three main things I wanted to show you in terms of how you can work with Webex UC Calling. So let me stop sharing this, jump back to the slides, see if there's anything here. Okay, and really just need to kind of take it forward. So just in case you're not aware, we've got a couple more future events lined up at the moment. I maybe ask Mohammed if he's not done it already, or maybe I didn't ask him to do this earlier, so he might need to dig out the URL, but we'll post in chat the URL for registering. It's the same one you've used before, and so you're possibly already registered anyway if you're on this event, but it's just to make you aware that these two are coming up. So we're going to talk about WebeX, just give you an overview of it, a nice simple top-down description, and then we're going to talk about PhoneView and Cisco UCM Cloud. Cloud all the things, that's where we're at nowadays. So if I go forward, that's really is from a slide deck point of view, just need to cover any questions. So if you bear with me a little second. I'm just going to open up the panel here and see what we got. In fact, I don't usually record the questions just because they can be a wee bit lengthy sometimes. So I'm just going to stop the recording there. So do that.